This is music, and this is another first impressions video. So I'm back with another first impressions video. In the first two videos on this channel, I showed you some quite epic hauls, I would say. And a considerable portion of those two hauls were blind buys, in particular, a lot of blind buy CDs. And I'm currently chewing my way through them and having a blast listening to some awesome new music. And I enjoy sharing my first impressions with you guys, so I figured it's time for another first impressions video, and I've been very productive this time. I have, I think, 10 CDs that I've managed to listen to. So far in this process, I've been very fortunate. Most of the stuff has been very good. Some of it has been okay, and some of it has been good. There hasn't really been anything terrible, so that's great. Let's see if this holds up. So the first item, the first CD is this one here, Crime. That's the band, and it's called First Crime. And this is an EP. And what's kind of interesting is that it says 4 tracks on it, but there are actually 6 tracks because the intro. There's kind of like an instrumental intro that's kind of like a track on its own, and there's an outro too, which is also a track on its own. So this is kind of like dirty, raw, heavy metal. So maybe very early 80s metal, back when it was very raw and there was still a very punky edge to it. Maybe it's actually not unfair to call this punk metal. Not crossover, but a blend of traditional heavy metal and punk rock. And it's actually pretty good. The production is quite raw, I would say, but the compositions I think are pretty good. It's a very fun listen. I really enjoyed listening to it. Crime, First Crime. The next one here, Equinox, Labyrinth. Now this one is interesting. As far as I understand, Equinox, they were like a Norwegian technical thrash metal band, and they started out being kind of like almost like a creator inspired, and then they became more and more technical, to the point that here it's really not that much thrashy. There are some thrash metal elements, and this is from '94. This is like a weird blend of jazz and heavy metal, and it's not like Atheist or Cynic, not in that sense, and I wouldn't say not in the sense of Pestilence's Spheres. This is, I think they draw, I mean, I don't know that much about jazz genres, but they draw a lot, I think, on swing jazz and woogie jazz, or whatever it's called. So this is actually pretty weird. It took me some listens to sort of start getting my head around this. And it's kind of strange because Cynic clicked with me the very first time I heard a Cynic album. Same thing with Atheist clicked with me like this. And the same thing with Pestilence's Spheres. It just, it clicked with me immediately. This didn't. It's very good. It's very enjoyable, but it's also very weird. There are some thrash metal elements on it. There are also some kind of sludge elements. There's some almost like grungy 90s rock stuff. As I said, lots of jazz elements. Not really jazz instrumentation. It's still played with the rock instrumentation, so bass and guitars and drums. I think maybe what made it a bit of a challenging listen to me might be the vocals, which are they're not growl, they're not harsh, but they're not like very advanced singing either. It's kind of like, I guess, like serviceable. It's still more like in the vein of thrash, shouting or whatever, but there's a bit of melody and singing to it. So it's very weird, but very interesting listen, and there are some quite enjoyable elements and quite enjoyable songs, but you gotta be prepared for some weird, jazz metal, I would say. Up next is Furious Trauma's Eclipse, thrash metal, and this is more thrashy thrash metal. This is straight up thrash with groove metal mixed in. It's kind of like somewhere in between thrash and groove metal, and it's kind of interesting because it starts out with a song called Hustler, which, honestly, it's a bit iffy. It wasn't that great. I thought, oh no, oh god, is this gonna be the terrible album? Fortunately not. After Hustler, things got better, and actually very, very solid, great thrash metal and groove metal. It was just Hustler, and that's also more of a groove metal song that just didn't appeal to me. But the rest of this album is absolutely great for my money. So if you like thrash metal, I would definitely check out Furious Trauma's Eclipse. Up next, Gamma Bomb, Citizen Brain, more thrash metal. This is more in the vein of, revivalist thrash metal. So newer bands that, I don't know how new these guys are anymore, but this one is from 2008 or 2009, so it's not that new anymore, but newer bands that deliberately sort of take on a retro thrash metal sound and try to, go back to the 80s. There's actually a song here, I don't remember which one it is, but there's one song there where they actually, I think it's the last one, Bullet Belt. That will make sense, where they actually sing about going back to the 80s. So this is 80s thrash metal worship, and it's great. It's great fun. Fast, up-tempo thrash metal songs. Very excellent guitar work. Fun lyrical themes. You have, of course, the classic Time Crime, which I had actually heard before. You have Sentenced to Thrash. So a love letter to thrash metal. You have Return of the Technodrome, which I think is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles themed song. There is In the Court of General Zod, which I think is awesome because that's like Superman themed. You have Space Invaders, which is probably a reference to the old 80s, it might even be late 70s arcade game. You have a song called Zombie Brew, which is about beer and brains. That's good for zombies. So Gamma Bomb, Citizen Brain, excellent, good, fun thrash metal. The next one is Hellborn, Hellblast. This is blackened thrash metal, probably leaning more towards black metal than thrash metal, but the thrash metal elements are certainly there. It's the songs are kind of, satanic, anti-religious, anti-Christian, blasphemous, and good fun like that. It's it leans, as I said, a lot towards black metal, but with a lot of thrash metal elements. It's pretty good, but I think the vocals are perhaps a bit too loud in the mix, so they kind of like overshadow everything else. But it took me, at least 3 or 4 songs for that sort of way of mixing things to sort of click with me, or I guess for my ears to get used to it. So it's pretty good. It's fun, but there are some I would say, issues with the production. The last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last 5 tracks are from a demo or some. I think it's from a demo or something. They're more like death metal-y, black death metal-ish. The vocals are more growled, whereas, so I guess this is an EP really, but on the first 6 tracks, the vocals are more like sort of black metal-y, shrieky. And there's another Hellborn CD here, The Darkness, you know, with unfortunately a price tag. Now this is more, there's still thrash metal elements to it, but this is more black death metal. And you know, comparing these two, right, The Darkness and Hellblast, I prefer The Darkness, the more death metal oriented one. The lyrics are still like anti-Christian and anti-religious and you know, blasphemous and all that good fun stuff, but more death metal-y. The guitar work, the riffage is also more deathy. So Hellborn, Darkness, not The Darkness, but Darkness, and this one I have here is the limited edition. There's some live bonus tracks on it, which I guess if you are a big fan of Hellborn, you will probably enjoy them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the way they're performed, but the production is perhaps a bit iffy for my money, but still a very enjoyable Black Death release with some thrash elements. Got more thrash for you here. I guess it's Izegrim or Izegrim thrash metal here. Modern thrash metal with some death metal elements as well. So, you know, some influences from extreme metal. This is what they look like. This is the vocalist. Her name is, let's see, it's probably somewhere in here. But so she has a very, you know, arch enemy-ish, harsh vocal style. She's actually pretty awesome at it. Here's another band shot. And her name is Marloes or something like that. I don't speak Dutch, but I think it's Marloes or whatever. Here she is. Probably she's gonna shoot me because I can't pronounce her name correctly. But Izegrim, Congress of the Insane, very tasty, very aggressive and quality modern thrash metal. This is really good stuff, I would say. I really enjoyed listening to this one. And the next one, I got more thrash for you. This is a very thrash heavy video. Kill Division, Destructive Force. So this is a 3-piece, as you can see here. A 3-piece. I gotta admit when I heard this, it was more extreme than I expected. It's thrash metal with, well, death thrash really, with lots of death metal elements, even some I would say hardcore elements. So there's a crossover feel to this album as well, and also some grindcore. There are lots of blast beats, a lot of blast beats that are intertwined with up-tempo death metal things, and, you know, up-tempo and mid-tempo thrash things, and some hardcore things thrown in. They make use of 2 vocalists. One of them is her, Susan Gerl. I think they're German, so it's probably Susan Gerl. And then one of the guys also sings, and they both growl. They both use harsh vocals, and the guy that sings, that's kind of like standard growls, so it just sounds brutal and so on and so forth. But Susan Gerl's singing is really scary. She sounds really demonic, and it works great that you have these 2 different growling styles. I mean, not unlike say early Carcass, where you have like really low guttural growls and really high harsh vocals. The range difference is not that big here, but you have two different qualities of voice, and this is a really enjoyable Death-Thrash album for my money. Kill Division, Destructive Force. Up next is Mordax, Violence, Fraud, Treachery. This is, they're often called a death metal band, but when I heard it, it struck me more as a thrash metal album. Maybe you could perhaps justifiably consider it a kind of like some kind of melodic death metal, but to me it sounds like thrash metal, modern thrash metal again, with some death metal elements, harsh vocals, some really good, really tasty guitar work, and that actually also applies to this one here. Some great, tasty, advanced lead guitars, and that's the same thing here. The solos are absolutely amazing. They're very rock oriented, actually. It's really interesting. Rock oriented. He makes use, the guitarist, of a lot of the rock tropes, more than sort of the typical death metal dive bombs and whammy bar madness, which these guys here use. Lots of whammy bar madness. There are a lot of solos that sound like a horse giving birth, and it sounds great because it fits the style, but this is more classic rock metal solos, and it just fits perfectly for some reason with the aggressive sort of death thrash music, and I would say what could qualify it as melodic death metal is that there's a lot of melody inherent in the songs as well, sort of beyond the lead guitars. So this is great stuff. I really enjoyed listening to it. And that leads us to the last release, Mosquito, Behind the Mask. And it's not a cover version of Behind the Mask, you know, Acid Rain, which is another awesome band. This here is also death thrash. I would say it's technical death thrash. There's a lot of death Schuldiner worship going on, and you can't blame people for worshipping Chuck Schuldiner. I mean, the guy was a genius, and Death was, for my money, brilliant. My favorite death metal band, one of my favorite bands of all time, and there's a lot of worship of death going on here. So very technical death thrash. The vocals are more deathy. Not Schuldiner deathy, but more death metal-y deathy, you know what I mean. But the music is more thrashy, but it has a lot of elements that you could find on the Death album as well. And I actually really enjoyed listening to this. I don't think it would be fair to accuse these guys of being a Death ripoff, but I would say they're more inspired by Death. But maybe you guys will have a different take on it. That's of course up to you. I really enjoyed listening to this. Great musicianship, great songwriting. Yes, considerable influence from Death, but who can blame them? Now, what's interesting is that I sort of looked these up on Discogs, and apparently they started up being a blues rock band in the 80s, and they ended up being a technical, almost progressive thrash, death thrash band. That's really interesting. So I would say again, it was a success. Equinox was a bit challenging, but you just have to get your head around it, and it might not appeal to you because it's so weird, but you know, it's really original. Equinox was probably the most original release in this bunch. Challenging listen, but a fun listen, and lots of variety in that album too. So if you are kind of like interested in some weird stuff, you know, by all means check out Equinox. And I would recommend checking out all of these bands, in particular if you like thrash metal. This was a very thrash heavy video. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed wasting more than 20 minutes just listening to me talk about my first impressions of these 10, for my money, very good, excellent, very enjoyable releases. I would recommend checking them out. Thanks for watching.